Battleline podcast, what's going on, everyone? Have a great episode lined up for you on this week's show. Toby Harnden, author of First Casualty, the untold story of the CIA mission to avenge 9/11. You're not going to want to miss that. And there's also some news to get into in the special operations community. And when there are major stories like there are this week, we do our best to get into them. But before we do, this episode is sponsored by Skillshare. Really excited to have Skillshare on board with us. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for curious people. For myself, I'm looking to learn more about video editing, video production, and so I could be in a league with these guys like Truthseeker, right, who we've had on the show, who does a great podcast, but also is phenomenal with the video production and video editing, and he's in high demand for it. And I think there's just a lot of people looking to learn that type of stuff. If you're looking to learn audio and what I do, this is a great resource for you to have. And also, if you're at a job that you feel is not fulfilling your purpose and you're not passionate about, and in the worst case, if you hate going to work every day and there is something that you have passion for, you could really step your game up if you go on Skillshare. It's going to take you to the next level and really be a game changer. Check out their classes with a special 2-month premium membership trial for the first 1,000 who sign up through our website, which I'm going to give to you. I'm telling you right now, this is your calling possibly if you're looking to do something new, career change. So go there now. It's battlelinepodcast.com/Skillshare. No promo code needed, but a special 2-month premium membership trial for the first 1,000 who sign up. So get on that quickly. battlelinepodcast.com/Skillshare. Let's go.
From Omaha, Nebraska to New York City, from planet Earth to extraterrestrial life in space, a podcast with no equal, engaged in unconventional warfare through your speakers and headphones. This is a show about embracing the suck, conquering your demons, and finding God in the face of adversity. Chris Tonto Peranto.
Twitch is on. Motherfucker, I'm gonna shoot you in the face.
Ian Scotto.
Ian and I have been dating for a long time.
You are now tuned into the Battleline Podcast.
The switch is on. Battleline Podcast. Ian Scotto here. So I woke up this morning, and Chris was supposed to be on this episode with Toby Harnden, but he reached out to me, and unfortunately he woke up, or at least had last night, I think, and it's still lingering, a fever, really feeling under the weather. We don't know what it is as of right now, but needless to say, it's just me here with you. So stay locked in, though, because we have a great show. Just myself. I know it's been a little bit since Chris has been on. This wasn't the way we planned this particular episode, but I would hope he will be back next week. What I really wanted to hear from him on possibly was, have you guys heard Hillary Clinton bawling and giving her acceptance speech had she have won the presidency? I'll play it for you right here.
I dream of going up to her and sitting down next to her, taking her in my arms and saying, "Look at me, listen to me. You will survive. You will have a good family of your own and 3 children. And as hard as it might be to imagine, your daughter will grow up and become the President of the United States."
All right, hopefully you guys have not completely tuned out after that because it's so cringe. What it really made me feel, and I'm sure Chris should have more emotion about this, but it's just compare that to the lack of emotion, the lack of empathy during the Benghazi hearings, and the what difference does it make, and all those sound clips, to how emotional she gets over not winning the presidency. It's I think I speak for like this whole audience that we just like to see her go away for good. And I don't mean that. I mean go away in the world of politics and in the world of publicity and all of that. She's really not someone we want to hear from. And when you hear just the egomaniacal response to reading that whole thing and getting emotional over it, yeah, I don't have anything else to say about it, because it definitely genuinely bothers me that she doesn't have any empathy for those guys like Glenn Doherty and Ty Woods, but when it comes to her losing the presidency to Trump, it's this huge emotional response. So I'm sure you guys have seen it, most of you. Let us know what you thought in the comments or on Instagram, or of course you could email us, battlelinepodcast@gmail.com. Now, in other news, Navy SEAL Team 8 Commander Brian Bourgeois has passed away. He died during a training event, and very unfortunate news in that realm. To give you a little bit of the backstory here, and this is from Navy Times, the Navy SEAL who died Tuesday after being injured in a fast rope training event last week has been identified as the commanding officer of SEAL Team 8, Commander Brian Bourgeois. Brian, and I'm just going to make sure I'm getting the name right here because I wrote it down. Brian Bourgeois, okay? Navy Special Warfare Command has released few other details so far on what happened, but Bourgeois, 43, was injured during the training evolution Saturday in Virginia Beach, Virginia. He was taken to Norfolk Centara General Hospital following the accident and died there. And this is a quote from Captain Donald Weatherby. An incident like this weighs heavily on all of us. Brian was as tough as they come, an outstanding leader and a committed father, husband, and friend. This is a great loss to everyone who knew him. He will be greatly missed. Weatherby said that the command is providing support to Bourgeois' family and fellow unit members. Now, I posted this on Facebook and to Battleline Podcast's Facebook, and one of our listeners, longtime listeners, Pamela Whip, let me know that there is a foundation benefiting the family, and that's All in All the Time Foundation. So I'll post a link to that if you'd like to donate, and it says please use the drop down menu to choose an amount. But they also wrote some more about him on there, so I'm getting this from the All in All the Time Foundation website. Through the All in All the Time Foundation, immediate response is provided to the needs of the Naval Special Warfare community. The needs are many, the needs are great. AIATT, through our Tragedy Assistance Program, can alleviate some of the burdens not covered under the larger benevolent programs that arise months, even years after tragedy occurs. Commander Brian Bourgeois was the commanding officer of SEAL Team 8 and lost his life after a training accident this past weekend. Commander Bourgeois is a native of Lake Charles, Louisiana, and has served for over 20 years. Brian entered into command of SEAL Team 8 after serving as the NSWG-2 operations officer. Prior to his return to NSWG-2, he served at the USS OCOM in the J-8 Directorate. His tour included time in the Maritime and Special Programs Assessments, then finished as the executive officer to the J-8 Director. Before his joint tour at SOCOM, he deployed twice as a troop commander to the continent of Africa in support of Operation Odyssey Dawn and Enduring Freedom. Then again as an executive officer to lead the transition from SOCCE HOA to SOCFWD-EA. His platoon command time at SEAL Team 4 included multiple deployments against the counter-Iranian target set in Iraq. From 2002 to 2004, Brian served aboard the USS Blackhawk MHC-58 as a surface warfare officer. He is a 2001 graduate of the United States Naval Academy and earned a master's in defense analysis from the Naval Postgraduate School. Brian earned the Pat Tillman Leadership Award while at NPS. Other military awards include a Bronze Star with V, Defense Meritorious Service Medal with an oak leaf cluster, Joint Commendation Medal, Navy Commendation Medal, two of those, and the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, the Combat Action Ribbon, and a NATO medal. He has been married to Megan Catherine Bourgeois for 20 years. Together they have 5 children: Barrett, who is 18, Allie, 16, Piper, 13, Cowan, 11, Jonathan, 6, and 2 dogs, Molly and Dudley. So very unfortunate news out of the Navy SEAL community, and we're praying for the best for their family. And once again, if you'd like to donate, it's the All In All the Time Foundation. Also, we are learning that finally Sergeant First Class Alwyn Cash will be awarded the posthumous Medal of Honor, and not just him, as well as Master Sergeant Earl Plumley and Sergeant First Class Christopher Solis. So, as a friend of, I would say friend of the show, but she hasn't been on yet, and we really should get her on, Lee Tuttle, a wife of a service member who really has raised awareness about some of the travesties going on with military housing. I would love to have her on to speak about, because of the fact that these private companies are putting military families in houses that have major problems with asbestos and that type of thing, and it's creating asthma, not just for service members, but for their young children and that type of thing. And she really blew the whistle on this, and not enough is being done. But as she said, because she was familiar with one of these guys, it's not just Alwyn Cash and 2 other guys, because I know Alwyn Cash was written about, of course, in the Patriot's Creed and Chris's book, but all of these guys were true heroes. So once again, remember all 3 names: Sergeant First Class Alwyn Cash, and Master Sergeant Earl Plumley, as well as Sergeant First Class Christopher Solis. We salute you guys, and I'm looking forward to seeing their families get the respect and the honor that they truly deserve. That said, we have Toby Harnden coming right up, so really excited to have him. We've been looking to get Toby on for a while, and I was glad that we finally set this up. Before we get into that, Fort Scott Munitions is a manufacturer of multi-federal patented solid copper and brass CNC spun ammunition that is designed to tumble upon impact in soft tissue, leaving devastating wound channels for faster bleed out and quicker incapacitation. This ammunition was originally developed to innovate and improve on the standard of military-grade ammunition design. It was found that not only did the TUI ammunition outperform competitors in the self-defense industry, but it quickly became apparent that it would be a top contender for hunters alike. With the ammunition being CNC spun, the tolerances are some of the tightest on the market, ensuring that you receive the same results with each pull of the trigger. Fort Scott Munitions is available throughout privately owned businesses in all 50 states. Go to the dealer locator on their website if you're looking to purchase Fort Scott ammo anywhere by you, and you're going to find somewhere when you type in your zip code. For me, it's South Shore Sportsman in Merrick. They supply it there. And every now and again, they do have bulk ammo, so sign up for their mailing list, and if you use our promo code, you'll get a huge discount on that, and you'll also get a discount on their merch. Great hats, the Tacti Squawk shirt, definitely a cool shirt to go to the gym in, and any other gun bros, I'll say, will probably compliment you. So check them out, guys. FortScottMunitions.com. Use the exclusive promo code Battleline for 15% off your order. Only available to listeners of the Battleline podcast. Fort Scott Munitions is a proud supporter of Chris Peranto, Battleline Tactical, and the Battleline podcast. FortScottMunitions.com. Link is right there in the description. Check them out and find somewhere by you that is selling Fort Scott Munitions right there on the website. Love those guys. FortScottMunitions.com. And of course, guys, Bubs Naturals, the namesake Glenn Bub Doherty for the brand, Navy SEAL, and you guys know his story. If you don't know the whole story, check out the episode with Sean Lake where we really talk more in depth about Glenn Bub Doherty and why Sean Lake started this company in remembrance of him, and truly something that he would love and that he would be taking as a fitness enthusiast. They're the only product on the market really doing what they do in terms of a collagen protein that's not only non-GMO, grass-fed, gluten-free, but also single ingredient, paleo friendly and keto friendly. Single source supply, which is huge. They're just getting it from one source. There's no type of blending. And with these grass-fed cows, you know that what you're putting in their body is good because you're going to be putting that in your body as well. It's important. It's the same way you're paying a premium for a grass-fed steak or grass-fed butter rather than just eating whatever garbage is out there. You're getting more omega-3s from that, which you can learn a lot about when you're eating grass-fed beef. Just like when you're taking grass-fed collagen protein as a supplement, you're getting great benefits from that. So also 100% safe for sports if you're getting drug tested, and a 2019 World Series champs winner as the brand, Amazon Launchpad brand. And they, of course, give 10% to the Glenn Doherty Memorial Foundation. What I've been using it for lately, I love putting the collagen protein into a hot chocolate during these colder months post-workout. Feels great, has your joints feeling good, and your muscle recovery on point. BubsNaturals.com. Promo code Battleline. You're going to get 20% off. We are getting such awesome feedback from listeners who have checked them out. So join them and do the same. BubsNaturals.com. Promo code Battleline. So joining us, or joining me, I should say, for the first time on Battleline Podcast with Chris out this episode, is Toby Harnden, author of First Casualty, The Untold Story of the CIA Mission to Avenge 9/11, which I have right here. Just out pretty recently, about a month ago, right? Or 2 months ago?
Yeah, September 7th, I think, was the formal publication date.
Awesome. Yeah, and to give some background on Toby, beyond just being a journalist, being an author of several books at this point, Royal Navy officer, retired as a lieutenant, so he's a veteran himself. We could definitely get into the arrest in Zimbabwe. That's an interesting story, as well as other pieces that you've written. But yeah, it's great to have you on.
Thanks very much, Ian. Great to be here. And sorry that Chris is out, but I hope it isn't COVID. I hope it's not too serious.
Yeah, well, we'll see. But you and I have been talking about doing this for a little bit, so I'm glad that it's finally happening. Of course, we'll get into the book. We'll get into Afghanistan and all that. But
sure.
I think people would be interested to know about your time in the Royal Navy, enlisting and how things went from there and what you saw and what you did.
Sure. So I'm fourth generation military. So my father was in the Navy. His father was in the Army. So my grandfather joined the Army. I think his first rank was boy in the South Wales Borderers. He joined in the 1920s and served all the way through World War II. And so I grew up kind of hearing his war stories and looking at his medals and various mementos from sort of battlefields in North Africa and India. And then his father was also Army, stretching back to the 1880s in Egypt and the Sudan. So I guess it was just part of my sort of family history. And actually, of my father's brothers, one was in the Marines and then in the Army, and another brother, his other brother, was in the Army. So I guess it's just one of those sort of family things. And I grew up mostly in Manchester, the northwest of England, kind of a grim industrial city far away from the sea. And I just wanted to get out. I remember sort of at the age of, 14, 15, just thinking, I just want to get out of it. I want to get as far away from this place as possible and never return. And so the Navy seemed a good way to do that. And so I was first doing my interviews for the Navy in 1982. I was 16 years old. And that was the year of the Falklands War. And so it was very real. I mean, there were ships being sunk. There were 2 destroyers sunk and 2 frigates sunk. And I remember picking up the Manchester Evening News, and that the sort of banner headline was Coventry sunk. And that was HMS Coventry, a Type 42 destroyer. And so, yeah, it really brought it home to me. But in a way, that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted the war and the combat and the sharp end. I was never one of these people who's just like, I just want to, wear the uniform and get some money for my education. And strangely enough, one of the early ships I joined, so I joined the Navy in 85, age 18, turned 19 during my first week of basic training, which wasn't a particularly happy birthday, basic training. But But one of the first ships I was on board was HMS Manchester, another Type 42 destroyer, and quite a few of the guys from HMS Coventry had transferred to HMS Manchester after their ship had been sunk. So this was for a young guy in the Navy. This was sort of real stuff. But I got a sponsorship through the Navy to go through college. So I went to Oxford to study history for 3 years. Basically as a civilian, but I had a naval rank and I had naval pay, and in the vacations I would go off on ships, and I joined a ship, actually HMS Manchester in Hong Kong, and we went all around Australia. So it was pretty good times. And then once I graduated from college, I was back in full time, but the problem with it was after the Falklands. There was the Gulf War in 91. I was based in Scotland, tried very hard to get involved. They weren't having any of it. They were like, you stay where you are. And, the Cold War was over. And so I traveled around lots of nice places. Went to Australia twice. I twice joined ships in the Far East, went to the Caribbean, around the States, Scandinavia, Spain, Portugal. It was great fun. But it just didn't feel that real. We were patrolling, the northern flank of NATO after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I was sort of, what's this for? And so, I had this sort of thirst for adventure, and it seemed to me that I was going to be able to satisfy that thirst more by being outside the Navy than within it. I was also conscious that, when you're a junior officer, you can kind of work the system and get what you want because there's lots of sort of flexibility in there. But the more senior you get, the fewer options you have. And, I think I had a little bit of a tendency to sort of buck the system anyway. So I thought, well, I'm going to quit while I'm ahead, before that becomes a problem. And so I just sort of took the leap. I served a total of almost 10 years in the Navy. So I thought, well, I'm 28 and sort of young enough to kind of pretty much start at the bottom in journalism. And so that's what I did. There was a kind of a crossover period where I was kind of moonlighting as a journalist while I was still in the Navy, which was a little bit uncomfortable.
Did you have to use like pen name or something like that? Were you writing about stuff that could be in conflict?
Well, it's kind of funny. I mean, I was writing for I can say this now because it's, whatever it is.
It's like, what are you going to arrest me now?
It's more than 25
I've already
years.
been arrested.
Right. It's 25 years ago. But, I was working for the Telegraph Diary, which was no bylines. But, I was giving them, I was working for nothing. But I got paid when I brought a story in. So that was a pretty big incentive to bring a story in. I was bringing in a lot of stories, and they were, certainly nothing that would have harmed national security, but kind of silly stuff that was sort of often a little bit embarrassing. Prince Andrew's ship running aground, the first Sea Lord being stranded because some junior officer had failed to read the tide tables properly, kind of stuff like that. And so I was writing those stories, and then it's funny, I was sort of seen as somebody who had some journalistic talent. And so they said, you can do a trial in the newsroom. And this was August 1994. I didn't officially retire until October 94. And so I went to my then boss, who was a commander, really nice guy, older guy who was retiring. He was going to become a math teacher. So he didn't really care. And I said, listen, sir, I've got this opportunity. And he said, great, go for it. He said, you probably shouldn't have any bylines, because, you're still serving. So I said, yeah, okay, that's fine, sir. And then when I got there, like on day one, I didn't misrepresent myself, but I kind of led them to believe that I had more experience than I did. I mean, which
is I feel like normal always with a new job, right? I mean, you want to make the best impression. You're gonna inflate things a little bit. I think everybody's done that at some point.
Yeah. So I had done, I think, 2 or 3 days working for the Western Morning News, which was a regional paper in Plymouth, because I was based in Plymouth at that point. I'd been kind of sent in exile, for my final year in the Navy because I was leaving. And so the person who'd given me the overall news editor, home news editor, was on vacation that week, and she knew that I had almost no experience. So her deputy was there, and then he said to me, "So who are you?" Like, they weren't expecting me, and I said, "This is Toby Harnden. I've been working for the Western Morning News." And he's like, "Okay, good. Do this story." And so he obviously imagined I'd spent like 18 months at a regional newspaper, and anyway, I did the story, and then somebody said, "Do you want a byline?" Or because sometimes people didn't have bylines, or they had pen names because they were working for other papers and they were kind of moonlighting. And at that point, it was just like a split-second decision. I was kind of like, well, yeah, I'll have a byline. so I had a whole month's worth of bylines while I was still in the Navy. And I wasn't writing about the Navy. And when I got back, my boss just kind of shrugged. And it was definitely the right thing to do because, your name and your byline is important when you're trying to break into journalism.
So wait, was there a different name you went by?
No, I just used my name.
Oh, okay. Got you. Okay.
And I thought, the old...
Well, I was a little confused on that if you did end up using your name. Okay, got it.
No, I just used it because the old thing of, forgiveness rather than permission.
Yeah.
At that point, I'm thinking like, listen, the Navy's, I'm leaving and I need to, this is a big opportunity. I'm working for a national newspaper. Am I going to turn down bylines? No, I'm not going to do it. And okay, if I get into some trouble, I'll deal with it. What can they do? Fire me? I'm leaving anyway.
Speaking of which, before we get into the book, talking about getting into trouble, I do want to hear the whole story because I have seen it, of you being arrested in Zimbabwe in 2005 for 14 days for what they call practicing journalism without accreditation, which really stokes your imagination to how much different the UK is, how much different the US is, in that we really have free reign.
Yeah. I mean, here, you don't need accreditation to be a journalist. You don't even need you get a card to go into the Capitol and stuff like that. But, there's a First Amendment, and if you want to write something and post it on the internet or whatever, you can do it. But Robert Mugabe's regime had this very repressive law, which is called IPA. It was access to information and the Prevention of Privacy Act. And it basically said you couldn't be a journalist without a government permit. And as a foreign journalist, you had to apply to this repressive, murderous regime that was very, very hated the West, and particularly because of the colonial past of Rhodesia and everything, hated Britain. And so, it was a fairly standard thing for British journalists at that point to not apply for permission and just to go in as tourists. And, if we'd applied, we'd either have got rejected, which would have then meant they would have had our names, and if we'd have gone in as tourists and we were sort of more vulnerable, or we'd have had some goon from the Mugabe regime following us around. We were not going to do that. So I was working at the Sunday Telegraph at this point, based in London as the chief foreign correspondent, flying all over the world, almost, every week could be, 1 week I might be in Saudi Arabia, the next week I might be in Thailand. I mean, it was kind of an incredible job. It was exhausting. But a photographer and I, who became a good friend, and that's, I'm glad he did, and you'll find out the reason shortly. Julian Simmons, and we hadn't worked together before, but we both spent a lot of time in Iraq separately. And so we went to Zimbabwe to cover the parliamentary elections in 2005. And we went in as tourists, and there was a bit of kind of joking around with the office because we were like, we're here as tourists. We have to create a proper tourist cover. So we're going on safari, and obviously we're going to put it through our expenses. And so, nice. So the news editor was like, yeah, really? Okay. And so we went off and we took lots of photos of hippos and lions and stuff. And then a couple of weeks, we've been there 2 weeks, and we'd done some good work. I'd interviewed Morgan Changarai, I think he was called, who was the Movement for Democratic Change leader, the opposition leader, who was kind of, regularly beaten up by Mugabe and his thugs. And so we'd done this clandestine interview, and, we'd kind of accessed this sort of network of people that help journalists and stuff. And so we felt pretty comfortable. And so on the voting day, we decided that we were going to go with an MDC opposition candidate, but we didn't want to just go with a white candidate. So there were lots of white farmers in Zimbabwe, and they tended to get a lot of coverage in the Western media. And so we thought, no, we're going to go with a black candidate. So that's going to be more interesting. It's going to be a bit different. But we were really getting a little bit, in hindsight, overconfident, because what we didn't realize was that this candidate was a woman. She was going into a ZANU-PF stronghold, which is a Mugabe stronghold. And obviously, one of the benefits of being with white candidates when you're white is that you can kind of blend in a bit. Whereas we were the only white guys for like 40 miles around when we went with this MDC candidate into a ZANU-PF area. And so we were at this polling station, which was a school, and there was just kind of a local ZANU-PF leader who just actually saw I'd actually finished doing my interviews and stuff. He saw Julian taking photos and sort of grabbed him and was asking who he was. And we were trying to talk our way out of it. And at a certain point, we weren't getting anywhere. And so Julian and I kind of conferred, and we said, right, okay, let's just make a beeline really quickly for the rental car and hope that they're just going to be kind of frozen. They're not going to know what to do. And if we don't run, but let's just get there. And there's a pretty good chance we'll just be able to get into the rental car and drive off. And so we did that. and they immediately grabbed Julian, and a couple of minutes later, he was in handcuffs. And so we were like, that didn't work. And so, the police came, and we were taken to a police station, and then some intelligence guy from the Mugabe regime came to sort of quiz us. And, we were just like, yeah, we're just journalists. We're just tourists. Here's our photos of lions and hippos. And I'd thrown all my books. So I'd driven to the police station. I'd thrown out all the books and stuff I had and all the kind of journalistic materials, apart from my notebook. I didn't want to throw my notebook out.
That was smart thinking, preliminary before you went out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and we didn't have our laptops with us. So, we were taking a reasonable number of precautions. So we were in a hotel, which was sort of safe for journalists. They knew who we were. Our laptops and most of our equipment and stuff was there. We had the minimum on us. I did have some books about Zimbabwean politics and stuff, which I just threw out the window of the vehicle. Julian took out his, then it was an SD card from his camera, and he put it underneath a blackboard duster in a classroom where we were sort of being held. So we didn't have much on us. Anyway, we got, we were 3 nights in the police station, and we kept on thinking, this really terrible cell, just horrendous, with just like a hole in the corner for the toilet, and that was it. Damn. And it was really hot, and there was mosquitoes everywhere, and we kept on thinking we were just going to get released and deported, but we didn't. And then on the third day, they I forget whether they took us to a courthouse or anyway, they took us to prison. And so all of a sudden we were in prison, and they fingerprinted us and did all this stuff. And then that was for me, in a way, that was the only really, well, not about really. I mean, Julian and I had said to each other, we're not going to get our heads chopped off here. And so we'd been in Iraq for 2 years, worrying about, the orange jumpsuit and being beheaded on video and all that. And that was just a constant sort of fear and possibility. And so
Yes,
we were
but
like,
with this being 2005, it's not long after some of those things that
oh yeah, it was, yeah. I mean, that was
Daniel Pearl and yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'd watched all those videos, and it was, yeah, I dreamt about that stuff, and it was a very big fear. And so we were like, it's not going to be that bad. But we went into this prison, and I remember there was the sort of commandant was in full army uniform, and he looked like Idi Amin, the famous Ugandan leader. He had all these like medal ribbons, and in this like sort of palatial office, and he made us sit on the floor. Like we had to sit at his feet, like even though there were these big leather chairs and stuff. And at that point, we'd been put in prison uniform, so we had these like this sort of green like canvas t-shirt and shorts, and then we were just in this prison, and so we'd been in the police cell on our own, or I think one night there was a drunk in there or somebody, but it was pretty much us. But then all of a sudden we were in a cell, we're in this huge prison, and the cell had more than 100 people in it. And so we were like, what's this going to be like? Are we going to get raped? Are we going to get beaten up? And it was sort of okay. I mean, they had a structure, they had a commanding officer. And there's a bit like the IRA and loyalist paramilitary prisons in Northern Ireland, which I've sort of visited and stuff, where there was the prisoners were organized in this military structure. So there's a commanding officer and his like lieutenants, and we were assigned people. And because we were Westerners and we had the currency in the jail was cigarettes and soap. And so we had a lawyer coming in every day, and we could get cigarettes and soap. So we had money, we had currency. And so we were protected because they'd obviously worked out that it would be bad news if anything happened to these guys. Plus, they can help us. Maybe they can get us a lawyer or get messages out and stuff. And so we were pretty well looked after. But it was, I mean, we're in a cell for 100 with 100 plus people. But it had been built for it was a colonial prison, and you could see the marks on the wall where the bunks had been. There were like 20 bunks. So it was a cell for 20. They'd ripped out the bunks, and we were all just sleeping on the floor. And, it was pretty unsanitary. And, I mean, we didn't think about it at the time, but the biggest risk was disease. And Julian had teased me actually in the police cell because I'd been bitten all over my body by mosquitoes, and he hadn't been bitten at all. But when we got into the prison, he had all these little bites on his stomach, and I didn't have any. They looked like fleas or something. But he ended up getting typhus and scabies, and I didn't get anything. So
lucky, yeah.
I was very fortunate. I don't know why that was. And then we were taken to court. We were put on trial, and luckily my notebook was completely indecipherable. So I had these scrawled notes, and it was my own version of shorthand, but they took it off to be analyzed, and they couldn't work anything out. They couldn't work any of the writing out. Julian,
was that purposely?
No, I just had bad writing,
But I mean, usually it's at least my writing is not good, and I keep a journal, but it would be legible. You'd be able to figure it out. I mean,
I could figure it out. I mean, it was my own version of shorthand.
Got it. Okay.
But I guess, they said they couldn't decipher. They couldn't prove that I was a reporter from this notebook. And they couldn't prove Julian was a photographer because he didn't have any pictures loaded in his camera. The pictures on my camera were pictures of, lions and hippos. And so we were acquitted and deported. And, the reason why it's good that Julian and I got along well was because we were chained together for most of the time.
Wow.
Either handcuffed together or we had leg irons.
I mean, that's something that they do on a challenge to see, could you stay with someone for 24 hours? And for you guys, nearly 2 weeks, right?
Yeah. And
wow.
Yeah. And, it was starting to wear thin after 2. I mean, we didn't know we were going to get released after 2 weeks. So on day 13, 14, we're getting this is beyond a joke. And we were facing potentially, if we've been found guilty, 4 years in prison. which, it's not getting your head chopped off, but it's no joke. And so we were starting to get like, okay, joke's over, guys. We want to go now. But luckily, we got along really well, and so we spent a lot of time talking about, you're in prison, you're just talking about your life, and I was 40 and single and sort of unattached at that point. Julian had just separated from his wife. He was 5 or 6 years older, and he was sort of saying, "Oh God, I'm stuck in this prison cell in Africa, and my life is a mess." And I was like, "Well, at least you have a life, I don't have a life, And so we had all that sort of banter sort of going on, and then I get really pissed off about certain things, and he'd be just like, "Calm down," and then he'd get pissed off about something. I'd be like, "Just it doesn't matter, Julian, forget it." And so we kind of played off each other pretty well.
Did it make you rethink being a journalist in these kinds of areas? Because the truth is, just as someone who's worked with journalists, someone who has a degree in radio, the truth is the people who get paid the most in journalism are the people who do these really easy, sensational stories about this is what this celebrity is doing this week. It's not the people on the ground doing great investigative pieces in foreign countries. Did you have the attitude of like, forget this, I could just do something a hell of a lot easier and probably make a better income?
No, I mean, frankly, it was a great, overall, it was a great experience. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I told you about sort of my childhood and sort of, yearning to join the military and be in combat. And, I grew up reading stories about Victoria Cross winners and, the equivalent of the Medal of Honor in Britain. And so it was exciting, and it was like living on the edge, and it was adventure, and it was testing myself. It was like, I can survive in an African prison. I can get through that. I can, I can keep calm. I can think logically. I can, I feel like I've come through the test. And at the same time, though, I did, and this kind of flowed from my conversations with Julian, and the whole "my life is a mess, well, at least you have a life" type of conversation. I did sort of think this is getting a bit crazy, because I'd been based in the Middle East in Jerusalem, going in and out of Iraq. It was very dangerous, and it was more risk for less reward at that point, because the appetite for the story wasn't as great as it had been before, but the risks were much greater. And then I was doing this. I was then based in London, doing this job, flying different places like every week or every 2 weeks. So I could never plan anything, or I'd have to cancel things. And again, I was 40 and single, and so it did make me think like, I definitely want to keep doing this stuff, but I can't just live this rootless sort of unbound life. So I think it did lead to me, I got married the following year. And I think all that experience in Zimbabwe did sort of play, into my kind of psyche. But at the same time, it gave me, in some ways, it only increased my appetite for doing that kind of reporting and war zone reporting, because I felt that, as I said, I've been tested and I could actually do it pretty well.
Yeah, I think it sounds like if you have the appetite to do that, and that's what you're passionate about, you're going to keep pursuing it. And it's the cliche of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Definitely, yeah.
It's a cliche for a reason. People hear it time and again, after you've been through a Zimbabwe prison, what worse could you do to me? So yeah, that's an amazing story. With that, I do want to get into the book itself once again. First Casualty, and as you were telling me before, this week, the week that we're recording this, and the week it'll be up, marks the 20th anniversary of the recognized funeral of CIA officer and Marine Mike Spann, who was the first American killed in combat in the Afghanistan invasion, and that's a lot of what your book is all about. So let's get into Mike Spann and
Sure.
why he is such an important figure beyond being the first person to make that ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, so the book essentially is about Team Alpha, which is an 8-man CIA team, 4 paramilitaries, 2 case officers, a medic, and a serving Green Beret captain, who were the first Americans behind enemy lines after 9/11. And Mike Spann was one of those paramilitary officers, and as you say, former Marine Corps officer. Although you're never supposed to say former Marine, are you?
Yeah, we said so, retired Marine.
Well, I don't know.
We say all the things all the time you're not supposed to say.
I know,
we have Dale Comstock on, and we say Delta Force, and you're apparently not supposed to say
Special
that.
Mission Unit. Yeah,
we all know what we're talking about.
Medal of Honor. You can never say. Well, I think this makes sense to me. The Medal of Honor. You never say Medal of Honor winner. You have to say recipient. Or awarded. And I think there's very good reasons for that. So I actually am trying to be very careful about terminology because I want to be accurate, and I know that it matters to people for good reasons. So I was in Washington, D.C. on 9/11, and I, vividly, obviously, changed my life in as it did with so many people, as it certainly did for Mike Spann and other people.
And just to give background for the listeners, why were you in D.C.?
Oh, so I was there for the Daily Telegraph. I've been posted there as the Washington bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph. So I was covering U.S. politics, and kind of having spent 4 years as my kind of real initiation in journalism was in Northern Ireland, and so covering terrorism and the military, but also politics. And then I got moved to this it was very big promotion, covering pure politics in Washington, D.C. And it was, it was kind of a little bit overawing because I'd covered this very small story. I mean, big in terms of the headlines, but, Northern Ireland's a very small place with a limited number of players. And I'd become this sort of deep expert in this very sort of small part of the world. And then Washington, D.C., I'm covering the whole world, and essentially from the political capital of the world. And it was pure politics. And so I was thinking, I don't know whether it's a great job and everything. I'm certainly not going to turn it down, but I'm not sure it plays to all my strengths because, it's just guys in suits and the Capitol Hill and, the White House and all that. It's not like combat and the military and real people doing real things. But then, 9/11 came along, and then all of a sudden the United States is at war, and it's a war zone. And that night, I went home, there's Humvees and National Guardsmen on the corners in Washington, D.C. So that had a really big effect on me. And, I tried to get to Afghanistan immediately. No, stay in Washington, D.C. But I covered the death of Mike Spann, just a couple of little news stories. And I vividly remember Shannon Spann, his widow, who was also a CIA officer, delivering the eulogy, 20 years ago yesterday, which was December the 10th, 2001 at Arlington. And then everything just moved on because it was sort of anthrax, and it was Iraq and all that. And there was this sense of Afghanistan's over. But Mike Spann and sort of who he was, and this guy from Alabama, he's 32 years old, very sort of, to me, he seemed, and more as I got to sort of research into him and learn more about him, it was sort of the personification of America after 9/11, with us or against us, sort of black and white, moral clarity. And he was the classic, send me, he was evacuated from CIA quarters on 9/11, and he was furious because he was like, we're the CIA, we don't go home, we do stuff. And so he was very much, a guy who did stuff, and he had 2 daughters. On 9/11, his son was 3 months old. He was newly remarried. His first wife was very sick with what turned out to be terminal cancer. He had every reason to remain in the US, and he not only was content with going, he wanted to go. He kind of fought to get on Team Alpha and to go. And so, that never left me. And in Iraq, around about 2004, somebody said, have you ever seen the footage of that CIA officer, running for his life after Mike Spann was killed? And I hadn't, and I watched it, and it was a guy called David Tyson, who was an Uzbek linguist and CIA case officer based in Tashkent, who had been with Mike in the Fort Kalajangi on November 25th, 2001, when there was a prisoner uprising. Mike was killed in the first few seconds. He fought these Al-Qaeda prisoners with his Kalashnikov and with his Glock pistol, but he was just overwhelmed, disappeared under a pile of bodies. David ran over, killed the guys who were on top of Mike, couldn't get any response from Mike, so kicking him, no movement, blood on the ground. And then David had to sort of fight his way out and killed a lot of guys getting out. I mean, he had no other option. It was sort of kill or be killed. And I remember seeing this video footage of David, and he's like, talk about the 1,000-yard stare, I just remember thinking, like, what's he going through at this moment? He's just seen his comrade Mike Spann killed. He's just killed all these Al-Qaeda guys. He's now bumped into a German television crew holed up in this building. He's still trapped inside the fort. He's going to be calling in airstrikes. He doesn't know whether the whole fort's going to be overrun. And so I became fascinated with him, eventually connected with him in 2013, but he was still serving in the CIA, couldn't really talk. But then fast forward to the end of 2019, he retired early 2020. And so he was like, I'm retired, I'm ready to talk. And so, it built out from there. The focus was Mike. And David was very kind of insistent on it. He's like, I don't want this to be a book about me. It has to be about Mike. It has to be about Team Alpha. And so it just sort of built out from David to the other. I ended up speaking to all 6 surviving members of Team Alpha. Also many Green Berets who were involved, the famous horse soldiers from ODA 595. Mark Mitchell, who was awarded a Distinguished Service Cross, the first since Vietnam, who led the rescue force into the fort that, and helped quell the uprising on the first day of what ended up as a 6-day battle. But I was able from talking to his comrades, and I also was able to get sort of access to various bits of sort of documentation. I spoke to his parents. I spoke to Shannon Spann, his widow, build up this picture of this great American, of this. Yeah. And we talk, certainly Mike Spann was the epitome of there is no such thing as a former Marine. I mean, he very much identified as a Marine, even though he had left the Corps and was a CIA paramilitary. But he wanted to be at the very tip of the spear, and he was. And so he became, on November 25th, not only the first casualty in combat, but he was one of the first 2 Americans to sort of question members of Al-Qaeda after 9/11. And one of those was John Walker. He didn't know it. Mike didn't know it at the time, but it was John Walker Lind, the so-called American Taliban. A white kid from 20-year-old guy from California. And Mike actually, he had all the right instincts. He was honing in on Lind, because he was like, you're a white guy, what are you doing here? I know you speak English. Lind didn't say anything, but Mike went to him along with David as well, again and again, like, who are you? And another prisoner had told Mike that Lind was an Irishman, and that actually was Lind's kind of cover. He had an Irish grandmother, and Al-Qaeda had told him, he trained at the Al Farouk camp, and had told him to not reveal even to fellow Al-Qaeda and Taliban that he was an American. And so so he was sort of passing himself off as an Irishman, but in fact he was an American. And so so I just built the story out from there, I guess, with David and Mike Spann at the center, and then Team Alpha, and this incredible story of these 8 guys just being taken in to the mountains south of Mazar-e Sharif in Black Hawk at the dead of night, not knowing what they were going to face, and helping the Afghan resistance defeat the Taliban and recapture Mazar-e Sharif. And then, of course, the events of the fort unfolding, and Mike, tragically, becoming the 79th star on the CIA memorial wall
Yeah.
There are now 137, and the first casualty in combat after 9/11.
The interesting thing about this book is I think if people read it and take themselves back to that time period, 2001 in America, it was a very different attitude in the country about Afghanistan because the attack had just happened and there was almost like unanimous support that we need to go in there. We need to take out whoever was responsible for these attacks. And it was long before things that you've criticized, which we can get into, but long before we heard these terms like nation building and building hearts and minds and regime change. It wasn't about that at that time. And it was long before the tides changed and the opinion changed about us being in there long term.
That's absolutely right. And so I remember this vividly at the time. I remember also thinking, this is not going to last. But Bush, in this period, in I think October 2001, his approval rating was 90%. In late September, early October, I can't remember exactly the date, but the authorization of force was passed by Congress with only one person, Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California, voting against. So everybody was behind this. Like the United Nations was behind it, NATO was behind it, and as a country, it was, we were sort of absolutely unified. And now it feels like we are absolutely divided. This is pre-social media,
Yeah.
and so we're absolutely divided into sort of two tribes. I think hopefully it's not we're not as starkly divided as it seems sometimes, but certainly we've lost that sense of unity we had then, and I wanted to capture that in the book.
And I should say, even in Britain too. This is pre-Brexit. Of course.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like the whole world, and so I wanted to capture that. And yes, in terms of the mission, you're exactly right. So I mean, this mission was hundreds of Americans, not 100,000 plus, and I don't think there was an invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. I mean, there was bombing that began, on relatively limited targets because the Taliban didn't have much infrastructure. That began on October the 7th. There was a CIA team in the Panjshir Valley in sort of, Northern Alliance controlled territory, so sort of somewhat of a safe zone. They were in on September 26th. Team Alpha were in on October the 17th. 3 days later, the Green Berets of ODA 595 came to join them, and this was like OSS SOE stuff. Very small numbers of Americans working deep behind enemy lines, working alongside the indigenous allies who were the resistance to the foreign invaders who were the Arabs of Al Qaeda. So, and it was successful. And it was an Afghan fight. So, the awesome might of U.S. air power was certainly the factor that decisively changed the military equation. But on the ground, the bulk of the fighting was done by the Afghans. And, the Battle of Kalajangi, it would not have lasted 6 days if the Americans had been in control. But there was this sense of like, this is an Afghan deal, and we need to sort of step back. It's not perfect, but, it's like Lawrence of Arabia's dictum, better they do it imperfectly than we do it perfectly for them, to paraphrase. And that was successful. The Taliban regime was overthrown. We didn't capture bin Laden, but, Al Qaeda was essentially expelled mostly and on the run. And then early December 2001, the tragedy of it is, I feel that the very success that Team Alpha and the other CIA teams and the Green Berets and the Air Force combat controllers had achieved led to a sort of, degree of hubris, arrogance, over-optimism, whatever you want to call it, amongst the policymakers. And they're like, well, this is easy. We can change regimes. Let's go do Iraq next. Democracy can flower wherever we plant the seeds. So let's have a centralized, democracy, nation state in Afghanistan. Let's shoot for the moon. And so rather than sticking with those sort of limited principles that we'd applied in the fall of 2001, it became this whole other thing, which of course is a completely different story. So I wanted to capture that because obviously I'd written the book. The book had gone to press 2 or 3 months before the collapse in August.
Yeah.
But I knew a collapse was on the cards because I was, this time, just over a year ago, this time last year, I was in Afghanistan, and I could, the Taliban controlled, most of the areas outside the cities, and it was just felt like the end of days. But I wanted to, and I knew the troops were going to be withdrawn. At that point, the deadline was September the 11th. So I knew that in terms of American presence for now, it was going to be over. And so I really wanted to capture this period where it actually worked, because I think in a lot of the news coverage, it was just, it was 20 years ago. So a lot of journalists were, kids when 9/11 happened. And I think, a lot of reporters and a lot of Americans just didn't realize that we actually had a winning formula. Now, whether that could have endured, and, there are lots of questions about it. And I don't want to be simplistic, and I don't want to just apply hindsight and be one of those guys sitting around in Northern Virginia, saying, oh, if only they'd listened to me, or, they just needed to do this. It's a difficult country. And this whole book, actually, although it was a period of success, I think the indications of how complex and difficult this place is to operate in, that comes through. But I wanted to at least capture the sense that, a couple of, the unity of the country and of the mission, and also the success with fairly, limited resources and a sort of a limited kind of modest plan of assistance, rather than taking over this whole country and doing it all for ourselves. I wanted to capture that.
Yeah. And as you said, although you're not someone who's trying to say, I have the answers for how this all should have been handled, you have written pieces about what went wrong. And you did write this piece in the Wall Street Journal, which I wrote down over here from August 3rd, 2 weeks before the before the withdrawal from Afghanistan. You wrote the U.S. won before losing Afghanistan. And you argued against basically a withdrawal, which was the one that we saw. So I'd like to get into that. Do you think do you think there should have been a long-term presence there forever? Do you think that we should have withdrawn most people, not all? I mean, because I think people do value your opinion on this.
Yeah.
Someone who did all the research you did for this book.
Yeah. And also, I've spent a lot of time talking to people like David Tyson, and who was CIA case officer and a real expert on Central Asia and Afghanistan, and also J.R. Seeger, who was the chief of Team Alpha, who was a Near East Division case officer, a diary speaker, who'd worked with the Mujahideen out of CIA's Islamabad station in the 1980s. These are people who know a lot of stuff. I know a lot of people that have thought about these things very deeply. And, many others, Kofa Black, who was the director of the Counterterrorism Center, George Tenet, who was the CIA director, and Hank Crumpton, who ran the war day to day, interviewed and sort of spoken at length to all these people. And so I believe it was, yes, clearly the manner of the withdrawal was catastrophic. It was horrendously mismanaged. I'm sure there'll be books written about it, and there should be congressional investigations, and we should, not to find scapegoats, but to prevent us ever doing this again, having obviously done it in 1975 in Vietnam. But I think aside from the manner of the withdrawal, which I think it's sort of incontestable that it was very badly done, and closing Bagram in the way that we did, and just basically pulling the rug from under the feet of the Afghan allies and just saying, like, we're off, you just carry on fighting, but, you've got none of the air power, the infrastructure, the advice, we just went from, helping them to not helping them with no sort of transition period. So, that was all terrible, but I also think that we should have had some kind of residual force in the country. And we we should have returned, which in some senses we already had, because American combat casualties were a trickle. The Afghans were taking most of the casualties in fighting the Taliban. But if we, I don't know how many troops, but 3,500, or like a small residual force of advisors, of people who, just as Team Alpha and the other CIA teams and the Green Berets did in 2001, could work alongside the Afghans and, help prop them up, help the government, give the government a kind of a lifeline for survival. Because now, that government's gone. And, as I say, I know what American public opinion was. I know that Trump and Biden essentially agreed we just need to get everybody out. But sometimes, you can do things. Politicians, if they have the sort of moral courage, can do things that public opinion is not completely behind. And I don't want to get too political about this, but the surge in Iraq in 2006-07 with the Bush administration, no one was in favor of that. But we did it. The Bush administration went for it, and it succeeded. I can understand the political difficulties. I can understand the war weariness. But it seems like, again and again, we pulled out of Iraq and then went back in because ISIS had just, had grown up in the vacuum that we'd left. And so it seems there's this sort of American sense of, we can end wars, we say when it ends, but, of course the enemy has a vote. And, when we're now back in the sort of period of the 1990s where we have this, repressive Taliban regime, Al-Qaeda is there, ISIS-K is there, and we have no Americans on the ground. So, in the 90s, that led to 9/11. So,
yeah.
So leaving vacuums and, withdrawing troops and saying the war's over, I don't know. It's that could be the start of a very sort of treacherous path.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to be in agreement with you. Absolutely. A lot of guys that we've had on the show, people who have served there, seem to have the same perspective. So with this book, wrapping things up here, I do want to ask you, this is so many years in the making, really, when you think about it, as someone, as you were saying, who was there in 2001 in DC covering the conflict and continuing to do research on these guys who were originally there. This is pretty much a 20-year of research book that put this together. What's the main thing that you want people to get out of this when they pick it up and that you want them to remember? So
I think, these are sort of in some ways sort of depressing times, with Afghanistan, and I know the members of Team Alpha, the emotions range from sort of mourning to sadness to anger, and, everything in between. And, I currently have the guy who was my Afghan translator just over a year ago is now living with me in my house.
Oh, wow.
We were able to get him out.
You could have had him on the podcast with us. Right. That would be cool.
Actually, the kebab I was eating just before the show started, he just passed me. He just given me that. So he's a good cook. So these guys from the team and others, Shannon Span's deeply involved in this, they are channeling all their sort of energies and emotions into helping the Afghan allies get out. And that's a very sort of positive thing. And so I think the big takeaway for me is this is what Americans can do. This is what human beings can do. In this case, Americans, although there are also British special forces in there, the SBS, that did amazing things and stepped up and ran towards the sound of gunfire, when the moment demanded it. But this shows what we as a country, when we're unified, and what small numbers of Americans can do when they sort of band together and put their minds to it. And it's incredible and it's inspiring. And I do think there's to sort of, end on a somewhat optimistic note, the country is very divided. As you said, the world is very divided. Everyone seems to be just screaming at each other and canceling each other and, trying to sort of school each other. But on the Afghan issue, in terms of the Afghan allies, I've seen actually the country sort of pulling together somewhat. I mean, I guess there are people on the extreme right and the extreme left that are kind of like, they don't care about Afghan allies, and they'll just cut these people loose, or But generally speaking, I would think that 80% of the country is kind of like, yeah, we should help these people, and in the vacuum left by the government, there are former military, former intelligence, other parts of the government, and just people of goodwill and people who get things done, who are banding together and getting people like my translator out of the country. Donating money, clothes, food, setting up flights, underground railroad networks in Afghanistan, support networks in the United States. And to me, that's the sort of spirit of Team Alpha and other Americans who stepped up after 9/11. And so I think that's the thing, that's in a way the lasting big picture thing that researching the book has left me with. And I hope that will be a sort of one of the takeaways from readers of the book.
Yeah, that's well said. And I think that people have such an interest right now with what went wrong in Afghanistan, researching the history from the very beginning and really digging into, okay, how things could have been handled or should have been handled. And in your case with your book, how things went off successfully early on.
Yeah. And also, I just wanted to, I'm a journalist by profession. I've covered politics for more years than I should have, 25 years or whatever. But at the end of the day, I've sort of realized this about myself. I don't really care what happens in the Situation Room or even the Oval Office. I don't care about the interagency process. I don't really care about how the presidential daily brief was delivered. What I care about is sort of real people doing things sort of on the ground and real stories. And so this is it's a narrative, try to write it in a way like a sort of a movie script. And obviously, you hope that
it is written that way.
Yeah. You're with scenes and characters and a sort of a narrative arc. It certainly has the context of 9/11, the context of Afghanistan, and this sort of very important period in history. But at its core, it's a story of a fascinating story of real people, and so that's what I wanted to do as well.
That's awesome. Is the book available on Audible? Did you do the audiobook? Or?
I didn't do it. So a guy called Dan Warren in LA did the Audible version, and he was fantastic. And it's got some really good reviews on Audible. And I had a previous book that was done by somebody, which I think the narration was not great. But this is really excellent, and so far better than my voice,
Well, that's perfect, because I was going to say with our listeners, we have a partnership with Audible. So if they go to battlelinepodcast.com/Audible and then check out your book, First Casualty, The Untold Story of the CIA Mission to Avenge 9/11, with their free trial, they could actually check this out for free. Or, of course, if I like to get the hard copy of a lot of these books, and you could pick those up anywhere books are sold, Amazon, elsewhere. So once again, First Casualty, The Untold Story of the CIA Mission to Avenge 9/11 by Toby Harnden, at Toby Harnden on Twitter, at Toby Harnden1 on Instagram. This has been fascinating. It's been great. And I think that you doing these interviews and you putting out this book is going to make people not just know about the guys from Team Alpha, but remember the memory of a guy like Mike Spann and what it means to really serve your country, what it means to make the ultimate sacrifice. And I can tell you with our audience, these are the stories they love hearing.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thanks very much, Ian. And I hope Chris gets better soon.
Yeah, of course.
But I really
back next week. It's been a few weeks without him, so yeah.
I really appreciate being on. I've listened to some of the other episodes and really enjoyed them. And I had noticed that Audible sponsorship you have, which is excellent.
Yeah, they're great. And I think especially with this audience who loves podcasts, there's a lot of guys on the road, a lot of truckers.
Yeah.
They might not get the opportunity to pick up the book. So it gives everybody an opportunity to, if they're driving hours in a car, listen to this.
Yeah. And I'm trying, and so on Instagram, it's funny how you shift from platforms, Twitter, I can't stand Twitter. But, and so I've moved very much away. I still put out stuff, but I certainly don't like to get involved in any engagement or certainly arguments on Twitter. But Instagram is great. And I have like hundreds, if not thousands of photos from this period.
Yep.
And so
if you guys want to see, that's the thing about Toby's Instagram, because I've seen it is not selfies of you. It is documentation of the work you've done with photograph after photograph.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to push out like kind of supplementary materials really principally to do with the book. Yeah. There's, I used to do dog photos and photos of my breakfast and stuff, but I'm done with that. Who cares about that? But yeah, so I'm, pushing out all the time photos of the team, of the Green Berets, of the Afghans, to just as sort of supplementary materials for the book, because these great sort of historic images, almost all of which have never been published before.
Yeah, I agree. I'll only do photos of me eat, my food or something if I'm out at like a really great sushi place or something. And I gotta say, like, this is amazing. Right.
Yeah,
I can't overdo it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I feel like you have these followers who follow you for a particular reason, and and they give you a little bit of wiggle room. And so, you can put out a photo of your dog or
like, this is not what I'm here for.
Right, but you can do it very occasionally, yeah. And if you start like pushing the envelope too much on that, you'll lose people.
Yeah, social media right now is so weird in terms of the whole algorithms and everything, and I really try not to get too hung up on it. No matter who you are, we're spending way too much time in front of a screen at all times, especially with you. It's like you're a journalist, so you're doing your writing in front of a screen. Then you're promoting on Instagram, on Twitter. You're doing an interview with me. It becomes a little bit too much. But yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of it, and I do notice certain things are not being as easy to find if you're not already a follower. And things are not coming up in the feed. Like I even noticed with us, we have Fort Scott Munitions as a sponsor, and we'll get posts taken down for ammo because we work with an ammo company and they think we're like illegally selling guns on Instagram, which we're of course not doing. But yeah,
I had a post taken down. I had a post taken down because it described David Tyson killing Al-Qaeda fighters. So I mean, it was an algorithm, but it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, I remember when I worked with actually like Jack Murphy, who we were just talking about, when we worked for the same company, like there were published photos, historical photos of like U.S. troops or British troops taking down Nazi paraphernalia in Nazi Germany. And that stuff got taken down by algorithm because it has the swastika on it.
Yeah.
So it's to the point where we're erasing history.
Right. I know. And people do these workarounds. I guess a bit like the spam you get from Viagra and stuff. They start putting asterisks and @ signs in the word, and so I notice people doing that. But it feels kind of sad if you have to do that, really. So
yeah, I agree. All I could say to people is be aware of it, but to not get too hung up on it. I think people get obsessed with it, and and also spend less of your time on there and more of your time reading great books like First Casualty, because we still do have that freedom to read that stuff and to actually get your news from the sources and your research from the sources of guys that you've interviewed in depth, as opposed to learning everything from memes and videos out of context, because that's a real problem in today's society.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, I struggle with all these things myself. I think, the opportunities for distraction when you need to put your head down and read something or write something, very, very many of them. And I guess each of us is only human. But one of the things I love about podcasts is how deep they go. Yeah. And also how, people have their political opinions, and some podcasts are very political. But generally speaking, in talking about this book, there's been very little politics. It's the opposite of the sort of cheap, partisanship or, oh, you said something stupid and you're an idiot, all that kind of stuff. And so there is the material out there to sort of go deeper and be smarter rather than, there's a lot of be dumber material out there. And so we each have to sort of try and, work it out, but I think podcasts, and audio books when you're driving, and the images that are available on Instagram and in other places, all the stuff's out there. And so if you can just try and focus on and using these great tools and these great outlets to sort of enhance your life rather than going down the other track. But it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to manage day to day for everybody, I think.
I fully agree. That's a good way of putting it. So once again, guys, pick up the book. Anything else before we wrap this up? This has been a fascinating discussion, and quite honestly, I learned a lot because I was I'm trying to think here my exact age. I mean, I was in New York during 9/11. But 15 years old when 9/11 happened. So there's a lot of stuff that was confusing to me that I didn't know, and I didn't know about these original missions. So I think people my age, right, 35 now, they might want to pick this up and get a better perspective of what happened. So I don't know if there's anything else that we didn't cover that you want to make.
No, that was great. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for reading the book, and thank you for your thoughtful questions, and it's been great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Toby.
All right. Cheers, Ian. Take care.
That's all for this episode of the Battleline podcast, but we'll be back on Monday with more American Straight Talk. Until then, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Battleline Podcast and on Twitter at Battleline Pod. To sign up for future Battleline tactical courses, go to www.christantoparanto.net. Believe in yourself, face all challenges head on, and as always, never quit.